He froze at his own doorway when he saw it. A billionaire CEO, the man who ruled his workplace with silence and fear, was on his knees inside his tiny apartment, scrubbing the floor like he belonged there. Nothing about this made sense. Why would someone with everything cross this line? What secret connected these two lives? And why now? To understand how this impossible moment happened, we must go back to a forgotten night and a debt never repaid. The key shook between his fingers, not from cold but from the day that still clung to him. The hallway outside his apartment smelled of old paint and someone else's dinner. The light above his door flickered, buzzing like a warning. He leaned his forehead against the wood for one slow breath, trying to leave everything outside on the other side of it. The day had been humiliation in small, tidy doses, corrected in front of others, ignored when he spoke, reminded that he was lucky to have work at all. He swallowed every protest because pride didn't buy groceries. All he wanted now was his daughter's voice and the familiar mess of home. He slid the key into the lock. Before he turned it, he heard something inside, a scrape, a soft clink, then a steady swish, like something dragged across the floor. His hand went still. His pulse climbed into his ears. He eased the key back out and pressed his ear to the door. Water ran for a few seconds, then stopped. A drawer slid open. Something heavy settled, careful, controlled. Whoever was inside wasn't rushing. Whoever was inside felt comfortable. Fear rose sharp and fast, slicing through his exhaustion. His first thought was of his daughter in the back room, her small body tucked beneath a blanket, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. He fumbled for his phone, then froze. Calling for help felt like admitting he couldn't protect what was his. Not calling felt worse. Another sound, an understated cough, almost polite, followed by a slow exhale, as if someone was working. Burglars didn't usually clean. His fingers tightened around the key until his knuckles ached. He slid it back into the lock and turned it as quietly as he could. The deadbolt gave. The door creaked anyway, a thin complaint in the dim hallway. He pushed it open an inch. Warm air drifted out, carrying lemon cleaner and disinfectant, the kind he'd smelled in glossy corporate bathrooms. The living room light was on. He never left it on. Electricity cost too much. He opened the door wider and stepped inside, body ready to shield, to lunge, to do something brave he didn't feel. The room stopped him. His home looked rearranged, shoes lined neatly by the wall, the couch cleared, the stack of laundry folded into clean rectangles, the coffee table wiped until it caught the light. It was as if someone had walked into his struggle and decided to tidy into silence. Then he saw the man in the middle of it, kneeling on the faded rug, sleeves rolled to his forearms, was someone who did not belong in a place this small. A crisp white shirt, a watch that flashed with every movement, polished shoes placed carefully off the carpet, bare hands wringing out a mop over a bucket. The man looked up. The single dad's throat went dry. His mind tried to reject what his eyes were saying. He knew that face from framed photos in the company lobby, from articles coworkers shared, from speeches played on office screens. The jaw that never softened, the stare that made rooms go quiet. The millionaire CEO who lived above everyone else's lives, except now those eyes were in his living room. The CEO didn't stand. He didn't bark an order. He simply held the mop like it was proof and said, very quietly, "You're home." The single dad found his voice, thin with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" The CEO's expression tightened, as if the next words were heavy. "Cleaning," he said. Then, softer, "and trying to pay back a debt I've carried for years." In the back hallway, a floorboard creaked, small, familiar, like a child shifting in sleep. The single dad's stomach dropped. This wasn't a break-in. This was something personal, and whatever it was, it had followed him the way home. He had not always been this tired. There was a time when exhaustion felt temporary, like something that passed after sleep, poor laughter, or a good meal. Now it lived in his bones. It woke with him before dawn and followed him through every hour, settling heavier by night. He rose early to pack lunches, braid small fingers through buttons, and whisper reassurances. He wasn't sure he believed himself. He was a widower, though the words still felt too sharp to say out loud. His wife's absence was a quiet ache, not dramatic, but constant, like a missing step on a staircase he climbed every day. She had been warmth and planning and laughter. When she died, the world did not stop. Bills arrived. Work demanded attendance. Their daughter needed breakfast, homework help, stories before bed. Grief learned to wait its turn. He worked two jobs because one had never been enough. Mornings began at the warehouse, where he lifted and logged and nodded when supervisors spoke past him. Afternoons bled into evenings at the office, where his title sounded respectable but meant little in practice. He stayed late because leaving early invited questions. He stayed silent because silence kept him employed. At work, humiliation came wrapped in professionalism. It was the meeting where his suggestion went unanswered until repeated by someone else, the email praising the team that never named him, the jokes that weren't cruel enough to protest, only precise enough to remind him of his place. He learned to smile at the right moments, to thank people for criticism that felt like dismissal. Still, he took pride in showing up. He ironed his shirts even when the cuffs frayed. He kept his desk clean. He did his job thoroughly, believing effort mattered even when recognition did not. Pride was the one thing he could carry without asking permission. At home, he softened. The exhaustion did not vanish, but it changed shape. It became patience when his daughter asked the same question 3 times. It became gentleness when she cried over scraped knees or missed her mother in sudden, confusing waves. He listened, always, even when his eyes burned with fatigue. Money was a constant calculation. Groceries versus gas, shoes now or next month. He never complained out loud. Complaining felt like a luxury reserved for people with room to fail. Instead, he budgeted, planned, and hoped nothing unexpected would happen. Because unexpected things were expensive, he was not bitter. That surprised people when they took the time to notice. He believed bitterness would poison what little peace he had built, so he chose restraint. He chose dignity. Even when supervisors spoke down to him, he answered calmly. Even when coworkers overlooked him, he did his part. His resistance was quiet but deliberate. Some nights, after his daughter slept, he sat alone in the dim living room and let himself feel it all. The grief, the pressure, the loneliness of being strong because no one else could be. He never cried loudly. He did not have the energy for spectacle. His tears came silently, wiped away before morning. What kept him moving was simple and immense. His daughter needed him, not just present, but steady, not angry, not broken, not absent in ways that mattered. So he endured. He carried his days like a weight he refused to drop. By every measure that mattered to him, he was surviving with integrity, and he believed, perhaps foolishly, that integrity would someday be enough. The apartment was small in a way that forced closeness. 2 rooms and a narrow kitchen pressed together like they were leaning on one another for support. The walls carried scuff marks from years of living, a chair dragged too often, a corner bumped during hurried mornings, but nothing felt neglected. Everything had a place, even if the place was worn. The living room held the heart of the home. A second-hand couch sagged in the middle, shaped by evenings spent sitting too close, sharing space because distance felt unnecessary. A faded blanket rested over one arm, permanently warmed by small feet that curled there during cartoons. The coffee table bore faint rings from mugs set down too quickly, and crayon marks scratched into the underside where a child had once colored. In secret, photographs lined one wall, mismatched frames collected over time. His wife smiled from many of them, her presence frozen in ordinary happiness at a park, in the kitchen, leaning into him with tired eyes and an easy grin. Their daughter appeared in every frame after a certain year, growing taller, losing baby roundness, gaining curiosity. He rarely looked at the photos directly anymore, but he felt them. They watched him come home each night. The kitchen smelled faintly of soap and rice. One cabinet door never closed properly and needed a careful nudge. A chipped bowl sat in the drying rack, reserved for cereal because it was her favorite. The refrigerator hummed louder than it should, crowded with reminders, drawings held up by magnets. A school notice about picture day, a list written in his handwriting that read, simply, milk, bread, patience. Down the short hallway, the bedroom door stayed open. His daughter's room glowed softly from a nightlight shaped like a moon. Stuffed animals guarded the pillow in uneven ranks. A book lay open on the floor where reading had ended mid-sentence. The air smelled like shampoo and clean sheets, comforting and fragile. His own room was plainer, the bed neatly made, not for appearances, but habit. A sweater folded at the foot, worn thin at the elbows. On the dresser sat a watch that no longer worked and a ring he couldn't bring himself to put away. The silence there felt heavier, so he rarely lingered. Every evening, he carried the weight of the day across the threshold, It settled into the furniture, into his shoulders, into the quiet moments between tasks. He moved carefully through the space, as if his fatigue might disturb the memories. Living there, he wanted the home to remain light, even if he was not. This apartment had seen laughter and arguments, birthdays and sickness, late-night talks and early morning rushes. It had absorbed grief without complaint and offered shelter without question. It was imperfect, but it was theirs. When he stepped inside each night, he tried to leave the world outside. Sometimes he succeeded. Sometimes the heaviness followed him anyway. Trailing behind like a shadow, he could not quite shut out, but the warmth of the place always met him first, reminding him why he kept going, why this small, imperfect home was still enough. He learned the hierarchy by listening more than speaking. It revealed itself in who arrived late without apology, and who apologized even when they were on time. It lived in seating charts and email chains, in who spoke uninterrupted and who learned to wait. He occupied the careful middle, useful enough to keep, invisible enough to overlook. The building itself reinforced the order. Glass walls on upper floors caught the sun, all lower levels hummed under fluorescent lights. Elevators filled with quiet tension each morning, eyes lowered, shoulders squared. He rode them with the same people every day and felt how power bent the air. Laughter loosened only when certain doors closed. The CEO existed as a presence before he was a person. His name circulated in memos and quarterly updates, his image polished and distant. People adjusted their posture when he passed, sentences tightening into something safer. He spoke rarely, and when he did, rooms stilled. Authority didn't shout, it assumed. The single father saw him mostly from afar through glass, across conference tables, in reflections on screens. The CEO's schedule moved like a sealed document, inaccessible, unquestioned. He was known for results, for decisiveness, for an efficiency that left little room for softness. Respect and fear blended until they were indistinguishable. Workdays stretched longer than promised. Tasks multiplied without recognition. He absorbed assignments that arrived late and were due early. When deadlines were met, the work vanished into the company's success, uncredited and expected. When something faltered, responsibility found him quickly. Meetings followed a familiar pattern. He prepared thoroughly, notes aligned, ideas refined. He spoke carefully, choosing words that would not offend or overreach. Often, his contributions landed without response. Silence followed. Then the meeting moved on. Minutes later, a similar idea might reappear from someone else's mouth and receive nods, praise, action. He learned not to flinch. He nodded along, took notes, adjusted expectations. Speaking up felt like pushing against glass, visible effort, no effect. Complaining felt dangerous. Gratitude was demanded, not earned. There were looks, too, subtle assessments that lingered just long enough to judge. The glances at his worn briefcase, his practical shoes, the way he left promptly at certain hours to pick up his child. Flexibility existed, but not for him. Dedication was measured by availability, and his life outside the office counted against him. No one called it punishment. It was framed as realism. Advancement required sacrifice. Visibility required presence. He was told this kindly, professionally, as if explaining whether. He accepted the explanation because rejecting it would require energy he did not have. The CEO remained distant through it all. He did not single anyone out. He did not need to. Systems functioned on their own. Indifference proved more effective than cruelty. It allowed injustice to wear a neutral face. On the rare occasions the CEO addressed the broader staff, his words emphasized unity and excellence. He spoke of values in general terms, of culture as an aspiration. Applause followed. On cue, the single father clapped too, palms singing, wondering if the words were meant for people like him. Performance reviews came with careful language. He was dependable, reliable, consistent, never exceptional enough to advance, never deficient enough to remove. He existed in the safe space where effort was harvested and ambition quietly thinned. At lunch, he ate quickly, often alone. Conversations around him drifted toward weekend plans, networking events, dinners he could not attend. He listened, without envy, only a distant awareness that his world ran on different clocks. By late afternoon, fatigue settled behind his eyes. He finished what others left undone, tidying loose ends no one would see. He sent final emails and waited for responses that rarely came. Leaving felt like slipping out unnoticed, which was both relief and wound. He told himself it was temporary, that endurance counted, that humility would protect him. But each day added a layer of weight, subtle and cumulative. Being overlooked 'twas not loud, it was quiet enough to doubt your own worth. And above it all, the CEO's office lights stayed on long after dark, a distant beacon of authority. He passed beneath them on his way out, head down, unaware that the imbalance he lived inside was being measured, silently, by someone he had never truly met. There were moments when the injustice brushed close enough to sting, a project he carried for weeks reassigned without explanation, credit given upward, blame trickling down. He watched younger colleagues advance, not begrudging them, only marking how invisible loyalty could be. Each slight was small, defensible, on its own, yet together they formed a pattern that shaped his days. He internalized the judgment, wondering if he asked for too little or too much. Doubt crept in during quiet hours, whispering that this was the limit of what he deserved. He countered it with discipline, with punctuality, with restraint. He would not give anyone a reason to doubt his value, even if no one cared to confirm it. By the time evening arrived, the office emptied unevenly. Laughter echoed from closed-door conversations as he packed his bag. He paused once, looking back at the rows of desks. The screens gone dark, the work would resume tomorrow, and changed. He straightened his shoulders, smoothed his tie, and stepped into the elevator, carrying the day with him, unresolved and unseen. It was not anger that followed him home, but the erosion, a steady wearing down that asked nothing and offered less. He kept moving anyway, because stopping felt riskier, because somewhere beneath the indifference, he still believed fairness existed, even if it arrived late, and because his child was waiting, trusting him to remain whole despite everything he carried inside. The breakdown did not arrive as a single moment. It came in fragments, gathering quietly, a way exhaustion always did. It surfaced on the walk from the bus stop. When his feet felt heavier than they should, it lingered as he climbed the stairs, each step a negotiation with his own breath. By the time he closed the apartment door behind him, the silence pressed in close, waiting. He set his bag down carefully, as if noise might shatter something already fragile. The day were played without permission. The meeting where his name was skipped, the look that slid past him like he wasn't there, the casual assumption that he would stay late again. None of it dramatic enough to explain the weight now bending his shoulders. He leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. Grief found him there, patient as ever. It wore familiar shapes: his wife's laugh, the way she used to leave notes on the counter, the warmth of a hand reaching for his in the dark. He had buried those memories under routine, convinced himself that survival required efficiency. But tonight they pushed back, demanding space. He wondered what she would think if she saw him now. Not broken, exactly, just worn thin. He imagined her asking why he carried everything alone, why he never asked for help. He imagined her disappointment, softer than anger, but harder to bear. Fear followed close behind. It whispered questions he avoided during daylight. What if this wasn't enough? What if endurance wasn't a virtue, but a trap? He worried about missing moments with his daughter while chasing stability he could never quite reach. He worried about failing her not through absence, but through quiet depletion. He replayed small scenes from the past week, forgetting to sign a school form, snapping too quickly over spilled juice, catching the look on her face afterward, confused, forgiving, trusting him to be better. That look hurt more than any insult at work. He sat at the kitchen table and stared at the surface, tracing old marks with his finger. He thought about how easily people describe strength, how casually they praised resilience. They never mentioned how lonely it was, how strength, when practiced alone for too long, began to feel like invisibility. No one saw the effort it took to remain calm. No one counted the moments he swallowed words to keep peace. At work, he was dependable. At home, he was steady. In between, he felt hollowed out by responsibility. He considered, briefly, what it might feel like to stop, to say no, to let something fail so someone would notice. The thought scared him. Failure was a luxury he couldn't afford. His daughter's world depended on his reliability. He could not risk becoming unpredictable. Tears came then, unexpected and unwelcome. He brushed them away, irritated by his own weakness. Crying didn't solve anything. It only proved how close he was to losing control. He stood, pace the small room forced his breathing into something even. The apartment felt different in these moments. Less like shelter, more like witness. The photographs on the wall seemed to watch him struggle. His wife's smile frozen in encouragement he couldn't answer. He turned away from them, ashamed of the heaviness he brought home. He felt unseen, not just by his employer, but by the world at large. He fulfilled every expectation placed on him and still felt like an afterthought. There was no villain to confront, no injustice loud enough to protest, just the quiet understanding that his best might never be enough to change his circumstances. He lowered himself onto the couch and rested his head in his hands for a moment. He allowed the despair to exist without resistance. He acknowledged the truth he rarely admitted, that he was tired of being strong, tired of being patient, tired of trusting that dignity would eventually be rewarded. In the hallway, his daughter shifted in her sleep, murmuring something soft and indistinct. The sound anchored him. He wiped his face, straightened his posture, and stood again. Whatever was breaking inside him would have to wait. Morning would come regardless. He turned off the light and moved carefully through the darkness, gathering himself piece by piece. He did not feel hopeful. He felt necessary, and for now, necessity would have to be enough. Time seemed to hesitate the moment he stepped fully into the room. The familiar boundaries of his home, its narrow walls, its quiet corners no longer behaved as they should. They held a stranger with the confidence of someone who belonged. His breath caught as he took in the details again, needing to be sure his exhaustion hadn't finally tipped into hallucination. The mop bucket sat beside the couch, water still rippling faintly. A clean cloth lay folded on the armrest. The air smelled sharper now, layered with something precise and expensive. The man kneeling on the rug rose slowly, deliberately, as if sudden movement might frighten him away. Up close, the contrast was jarring. The CEO's presence filled the room, not through force but certainty. His posture was composed, his expression guarded in a way the father had never seen at work. There were no assistants, no glass walls, no audience to perform for, just the two of them, suspended in a moment neither had prepared for. "I didn't mean to scare you," the CEO said. His voice was lower than expected, stripped of the authority that usually shaped it. "I should have waited." The father struggled to respond, words tangled behind disbelief. "You're in my house," he managed. It sounded inadequate, like naming rain while standing in a storm. "Yes," the CEO said simply. He glanced around, taking in the photos, the worn furniture, the quiet evidence of a life lived carefully. "I know." That knowledge unsettled him more than the intrusion itself. "How?" he asked. "Why?" The CEO exhaled, slow and measured, as if steadying himself. "Because I owe you something," he said. "And because it took me too long to understand that debts don't disappear just because time passes." He gestured toward the kitchen, the clean counters, the reorganized shelves. "I know this doesn't make sense yet, but please let me explain." The father remained near the door, half expecting the moment to fracture. He nodded once. The CEO leaned against the counter, eyes unfocused now, fixed on memory rather than room. "Years ago," he began, "before titles and offices and everything people see now, I was someone else. I was reckless, angry, certain I was right about things I barely understood." He paused, jaw tightening. "I was driving one night, too fast, too distracted by my own thoughts. I ran a red light." The room felt smaller as the words settled. "There was a collision," the CEO continued. "Not a dramatic one, not the kind that makes headlines, but enough to trap me in the car, enough to fill the cabin with smoke. I remember thinking I was going to die there unseen. Because no one stopped." The father's chest heightened an instinctive empathy he hadn't invited. "You were there," the CEO said quietly. "You were coming off a late shift. You saw the crash and pulled over without hesitation. You didn't know me. You didn't ask who I was. You broke a window with your bare hands and pulled me out before the fire reached the engine." The memory surfaced slowly, reluctantly. A night blurred by urgency, a stranger coughing on the pavement, sirens in the distance. He had stayed until help arrived, then left without giving his name. There had been bills to pay, a child to get home to. "I never forgot your face," the CEO said, "but I forgot what it meant." He looked up then, meeting the father's eyes fully. "You saved my life, and I walked away from that night believing it was luck, or fate or anything that didn't require me to change. The father felt something shift, a subtle reordering inside him. I didn't do it for thanks, he said automatically. Anyone would have. No, the CEO interrupted, gently but firmly. Not everyone stops, not everyone risks themselves for a stranger. You did. And I built everything I have now on the second chance you gave me. Silence stretched between them, heavy but different now, not threatening, expectant. I recognized your name months ago, the CEO continued. On a report, I told myself it couldn't be you. That the man who saved me would be somewhere else, doing better. I ignored the coincidence, because acknowledging it would have required me to look at how I treat people. He gestured around the room again, shame flickering across his features. Then I saw your file, your hours, your evaluations. I saw how invisible you'd become in the system I designed. The father's hands curled into fists at his sides. So this is what? He asked. An apology. It's a beginning, the CEO said. I can't rewrite years of indifference. I can't undo the weight you've carried. But I can show you that I see you now. Not as an employee, as a person. He picked up the mop again, the gesture both absurd and sincere. I wanted to do something that made me uncomfortable. Something that reminded me what dignity looks like up close, in the hallway. A small sound broke the moment, a sleepy shuffle, a soft yawn. The father's heart leapt. He turned just as his daughter appeared. Hair tousled, eyes half open. She took in the scene with innocent confusion. Daddy, she asked, why is there a man cleaning? The CEO knelt immediately, setting the mop aside. He smiled at her, careful and respectful. Because your dad is someone very important, he said. And I'm helping. The father felt tears press close again, this time different. Less despair, more release. If you believe one small kindness can change everything, remember this moment, because the past does not always return with noise or punishment. Sometimes it comes quietly, carrying a bucket and a debt, asking to be seen, and in that quiet, something irreversible had begun. The shift did not happen overnight, nor did it arrive with spectacle. It unfolded in measured steps, deliberate and public, as if the truth itself required witnesses to breathe. The following week, the father was called into a company-wide meeting. One announced with unusual urgency. People filled the auditorium with quiet speculation. Phones silenced, eyes alert. The CEO stood at the front without slides, without notes, without the armor of rehearsed confidence. When he spoke, it was not to announce profits or strategy. He began by naming failure. He spoke about systems built for efficiency that quietly erased people, about how leadership could hide behind distance and call it objectivity. He did not single out individuals. He singled out himself. He described how power insulated him from the human cost of decisions, how success had narrowed his vision until he mistook silence for consent. Then he told a story, not the whole story, but enough. He spoke of a night years ago when a stranger stopped on a dark road and pulled him from a wreck without asking for recognition. He spoke of the debt that moment created, and the shame of forgetting it. He did not use the father's name at first. He let the room sit with the idea that lives intersect in ways titles cannot contain. When he finally did turn, his gaze settled on the father, seated midway back, shoulders tense. Unsure whether to stand or disappear, the CEO said his name, clearly, without hesitation. The sound carried across the room, anchoring attention. This man, he said, has been here longer than many of us. He has carried responsibilities quietly, consistently, and I failed to see him. The room did not erupt. It stilled. Colleagues turned in their seats, recognition dawning slowly, awkwardly. The father felt heat rise in his chest, not pride, not anger, but something like relief breaking through caution. The CEO continued. He acknowledged the patterns that had allowed diligence to become invisible. He admitted that performance metrics had replaced curiosity, that empathy had been outsourced to slogans. He named the consequences without softening them. People listened because the language was unfamiliar and polished, accountable. He announced changes, but not as redemption, as obligation. Reviews would be revisited, credit reassigned. Structures examined for quiet harm. He asked managers to listen more than defend, to notice who stayed late without being asked, who left early to care for someone unseen. He asked them to learn names they had overlooked. Then he did something unexpected. He stepped down from the stage and handed the microphone to the father. The room held its breath. The father did not want the microphone. He did not want the weight of interpretation or the risk of being misunderstood, but he took it, because declining felt like retreat. He spoke simply. He said he had never expected recognition, only fairness. He said he believed most people wanted to do right when they were willing to look. He said dignity mattered, even when no one was watching. He did not accuse. He did not plead. He stated truths the way one names facts. The room listened differently now. Not to authority, but to experience. When he finished, the applause that followed was restrained, respectful, not celebration, but acknowledgement. After the meeting, conversations shifted. People approached him cautiously, unsure of tone. Some apologized. Some thanked him. Some said nothing, but their eyes changed. The weight he carried did not vanish, but redistributed. He was no longer alone beneath it. The CEO did not retreat into distance again. He made himself visible, available, uncomfortable when necessary. He asked questions in meetings and waited for answers. He corrected interruptions. He returned credit to its source. When mistakes happened, he addressed them without deflection. The power dynamic had not reversed into humiliation. It had leveled into responsibility. Authority remained, but there were humility now. For the father, justice arrived quietly. His work was acknowledged in writing, in action, in opportunity. His schedule gained flexibility without penalty. His ideas found space. He was invited into rooms where decisions formed, not as a symbol, but as a contributor. At home, he told his daughter about the meeting in careful terms. She listened, serious, then smiled. "They saw you," she said, as if naming something obvious. "Yes," he answered, surprised by how true it felt. Justice did not erase the past, but it changed the future's shape. The erosion stopped. In its place grew something steadier. Trusts were built through action. The company moved on, imperfect but altered. And the father walked through its halls differently now, not taller, not louder, but anchored, seen. The second visit came without announcement. No calendar invite, no security detail, no audience waiting to interpret it. The father returned home early that afternoon, expecting only quiet and a chance to start dinner before his daughter arrived from school. Instead, he found the door unlocked and laughter drifting from inside, light and unfamiliar. His first instinct was panic. His second was recognition. The CEO sat cross-legged on the living room floor, sleeves rolled again, but this time without urgency. In front of him lay a spread of colored paper, glue sticks, and markers. His daughter knelt opposite, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration as she pressed glitter into place. They both looked up. "Daddy," she said brightly, as if this were the most natural arrangement in the world. "We're fixing the frames." Along the wall, the photographs had been taken down. Their mismatched frames lay stacked carefully, glass cleaned, backs repaired with steady hands. The CEO rose, uncertain for a moment, then spoke. "I hope this is okay," he said. She said some of them kept slipping. The father nodded, unable to find words. He watched as his daughter proudly held up a finished frame, newly reinforced. A strip of blue paper lining the edge, "So mommy doesn't fall," she explained. Something tightened behind his eyes. They worked together in quiet rhythm. No explanations, no speeches, just small acts layered carefully, like repairs meant to last. When the frames went back up, they were straighter, sturdier. The wall looked the same at a glance, but it felt different, more secure, less fragile. Later, as his daughter went to wash her hands, the CEO lingered by the doorway. "I wanted to apologize," he said, "not as your employer, as the man who benefited from your strength without honoring it." He reached into his coat and withdrew a folder, thin but deliberate. Inside were documents, adjustments to compensation, flexible hours formalized, a written acknowledgement placed into record, not gifts, corrections. "This isn't charity," the CEO said quietly. "It's responsibility. And this," he gestured around the room, "this is personal." He hesitated, then continued. "I can't give back what you lost. I can't undo years of silence. But I can promise that what you carry alone ends here." The father absorbed the words slowly. The weight he'd learned to manage shifted, not vanishing, but lifting enough to breathe beneath it. Before leaving, the CEO did one last thing. He knelt by the door and placed the polished shoes back on, slower than before, as if reluctant to break the spell. Then he turned to the child and said, "Your dad is very brave. You should be proud of him." She smiled, already knowing. When the door closed behind him, the apartment felt fuller, not louder, not changed in appearance, but lighter. The father sat on the couch, his daughter curling beside him, and realized something subtle and profound had happened. The house was clean, but more than that, the burden of being unseen had finally been acknowledged, lifted by hands that chose humility over distance, and for the first time in a long while, he rested without bracing for what came next. Life did not become easier in a way that could be measured cleanly. Bills still arrived, morning still came too early, the apartment remained small, the routines familiar, but something essential had shifted inside him, altering how he moved through each day. He no longer carried himself as if apologizing for existing. At work, he spoke with the same calm tone as before, but his words no longer felt tentative, as though they needed permission to matter. When he entered a room, people looked up, not out of fear or obligation, but recognition. His presence had weight now, not borrowed, but earned. The change was most visible in small moments. A colleague asking his opinion and waiting for the answer, a manager checking in without agenda, meetings where interruptions were corrected gently, without embarrassment. The workplace did not transform into something ideal, but it softened. Awareness spread quietly, like light moving through blinds. At home, his daughter noticed before he did. She watched how he stood straighter, how his laughter came more easily, how he no longer stared at the wall in silence after long days. One evening, as they washed dishes together, she asked, "Are you happier now?" He paused, considering the question carefully. "I think I feel more real," he said at last. She nodded, satisfied, as if that made perfect sense. He made an effort to be more present, not because someone told him to, but because he no longer felt constantly braced against collapse. They cooked together, talked longer before bed. When she spoke about school, he listened without the background hum of worry pulling at his attention. He felt the quiet joy of being enough, just as he was. The photographs on the wall felt different too, not painful reminders, but continuity. His wife's smile no longer felt like a standard he was failing to meet. It felt like encouragement, carried forward. Grief remained, but that loosened its grip, making room for gratitude alongside it. In the community, beyond work, subtle ripples formed. People began to speak more openly about balance, about care, about the unseen labor carried by those who asked least. No grand declarations followed, just changed habits, a willingness to notice. The CEO kept his word. Accountability became practice, not performance. Mistakes were addressed directly. Kindness was not framed as weakness, but clarity. Others followed, not perfectly, but sincerely. The father understood that justice was not a single event. It was maintenance. It required attention, humility, repetition. He did not expect perfection from people anymore, including himself. Healing, he learned, was not about erasing scars, but about no longer being defined by them. One night, as he tucked his daughter into bed, she reached for his hand and held it tightly. "I like how you are now," she said, half asleep. He smiled, heartful and steady. "Me too," he replied. When the lights went out, the apartment settled into familiar quiet. The same walls, the same furniture, the same life change, not by magic, but by recognition. He laid down knowing he would still have hard days ahead. But he also knew this. He was seen, he was valued, and he no longer carried the weight alone. Some stories end with applause. This one ends with a question. And it belongs to you. How many people pass through your day carrying quiet weight you never see? How many stand beside you at work, on the bus, in line at a store, doing everything right and still wondering if they matter? Leadership is not a title, and kindness is not an inconvenience. Both are choices, made in ordinary moments, often without witnesses. The father in this story did not ask to be rescued. He showed up, endured, and protected what mattered to him. The CEO did not erase the past, he faced it. Justice arrived not through punishment, but through accountability, humility, and action. That is the kind of change that lasts. If this story moved you, pause for a moment before scrolling on. Think about the people you overlook because they are reliable. Think about the ones who stay quiet because speaking feels risky. Ask yourself what it would mean to truly see them. What would you have done if you were in that position? Would you have stopped that night? Would you have spoken up later? Would you have been brave enough to admit you were wrong? Kindness does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like listening. Sometimes it looks like fixing what you broke. Sometimes it looks like cleaning a room you never had to enter. Simply to acknowledge a debt of humanity. If you believe one small act can change a life, share this story. Send it to someone who leads others. Send it to someone who feels invisible. Let it be a reminder that dignity matters, effort matters, and people matter. The world does not need louder voices. It needs clearer hearts, and change begins the moment we decide to see others.